course of this video, we're going to talk about some safety regulations of the FMCSA and talk about some more specific rules to help you avoid claims, accidents, tickets, and help you maintain a clean driving record while working with us. We also have created a supplemental handbook, and we encourage you to read through it. Much of the things in the handbook discuss materials you should have with you in the truck. Those list of materials include tools, personal protective wear that help keep you safe and moving in the truck. Before we get going, let's take a look at some of the items you should have as a driver inside the truck. On your first day, before you start driving, check to make sure you have everything in the truck you need with you. First, make sure you have a valid registration paper for your truck for your plates. Make sure you have a copy of your IFTA license paperwork in the truck and an IFTA sticker on both sides of the truck. You must have a master lease agreement with you in the truck. These are good for 1 year and must be renewed with the safety team on the anniversary you signed it. Next, you want a copy of the annual inspection paperwork and make sure you have a sticker decal on the truck as well. A copy of the JAS insurance card, and a copy of our hazmat registration as a company, even if you aren't a hazmat certified driver. Everyone should have the hazmat registration in their truck. So you've checked all of that. Now also make sure you have your driver's license with you at all times and a copy of your medical card. If you've got all those things, good. We're just about ready to get the truck moving. Before that, let's talk about pre-trip inspection, window tints, and the importance of keeping your license plate clean. JAS has a policy of not accepting window tints unless you can prove to us that your window tint is legal. One of the reasons is you'll find that often the things they're selling that tell you that they're legal, your window already has a tint placed in it when the dealer sold the truck to you with the window. They already pre-tint the glass. So when you add a tint to that tint, you need to make sure it complies with the regulation. If you can tell it's tinted from the outside, odds are you're going to get a violation and an out of service because your truck isn't ready to be driven. So we do not allow window tints. When it comes to your plate, the reason we want to keep it clean and free from debris is in case your iPass isn't working, the tollway is going to try to take a picture of your front plate. If it fails to capture your front plate, it will take a picture of the rear chassis plate that you're pulling. That will in turn create a fine to the owner of that equipment. The owner of the equipment won't just receive the fine and pay it. He's going to receive the fine, pay the full amount, around $30. Then he is going to tack on his own fee of around $20. Then he's going to send it to the railroad, who will also tack down somewhere around $20. So your missed toll becomes a $70 fine to you. You don't want to get into that situation, so do everything you can to make it easy for iPass to recognize your plate and make sure your iPass is working. Now with your truck pre-trip inspection before operating the vehicle, the rules state, 396.13, the driver must inspect the vehicle and be satisfied that it is in safe operating condition. If the last vehicle inspection report notes any deficiencies, the drivers must review and sign to acknowledge and certify the required repairs were made. Part of your orientation will go over a pre-trip inspection video in our Infinity software, but just at a minimum, you should be checking your brakes, truck frame, tires, suspension, vehicle inspection report, coupling devices, wheels and rims, turn signals, windshield wipers, brake lamps, tail lamps, headlamps, steering mechanism, exhaust system, and fuel system. Now, as you're doing that, if you do notice anything that is safe still to drive, you can mark it on your end of the day report, your DVIR form, and if you get a violation, you can show them, hey, I found this, I just did not have time to repair it. Of course, if anything would affect the safety of the vehicle, you should call off and not take a load for the day. Tell them I can't work, this isn't safe. Pre-tripping a container can be the difference between a good day and a bad day. And pre-tripping your container is important, A, because it will keep the public safe and you safe. People can die if you're not doing your pre-trip inspection properly. So it's very important when you pre-trip a container that you pay attention to all the little details. You also don't want to become stranded on the road because something is wrong with the container. So a pre-trip is very important, if not the most important part of being an intermodal truck driver. So let's take a look at the things we should be checking. First, we're going to check the slider pins. You want to make sure the slider works and that you can slide the container. In some cases, you won't get unloaded if the slider does not work. You want to make sure the slider works also because you may need to change and move the slider in position to avoid things like overweights. We're going to talk more about overweight later, but make sure that slider works before you outgate the container. Next, we're looking at the chassis twist safety locks. We want to make sure that the locks are engaged and the pins are securely in the hole. We're looking at a picture here of one where the container is resting on the pins. This is extremely dangerous. You want to make sure, if you check nothing else, that you check to make sure those pins are inside those holes so the container is secure to the chassis and doesn't fly off while you're driving. You don't want to cause a deadly accident because you didn't check the pins and you didn't lock the locks on the chassis. So always make sure the lock is engaged. Take a twist tie and tie it in place to make sure that lock doesn't move, the pins stay in the holes, and the container is secure with the locks. You also want to make sure the bolster is not bent and can be secured. When you lock up the kingpin, make sure that the kingpin, do a tug test, make sure you're hooked up properly, that it won't slip out from you, and get out from the truck. Go underneath and with a flashlight take a look and make sure the locking jaws are correct around the kingpin. And then you can proceed. The next thing you're checking on the pre-trip inspection are your landing legs. You want to make sure that they can go all the way up and all the way down, that the crank handle is there, that it works. You always want the legs all the way out. More than once we've had someone strike railroad tracks while driving, and in one case pull them out of the ground. So you always want to make sure the landing legs go all the way up. If you're at the ramp and you can't bring the landing legs up high enough to safely have them fixed, make a spotter do it. Do not let the spotter tell you it's okay. This is not something you want to engage in. Whenever something feels like it's not safe, don't do it. You also want to check your landing gear to make sure there are sand shoes and they are both there and both work properly. You're checking the crank handle. You're checking to make sure there are mud flaps and the mud flaps aren't ripped and torn but properly placed. You also want to check your tires very carefully, and to do that you want to use a pressure gauge. You want to make sure there are at minimum 80 psi inside the tire, that it's not flat, that the tread has at least 2/32 of an inch, and you want to take a look carefully at the tires to see if there are any skid flat marks. If there are any skid flat marks, you want to change the tire before you leave the ramp. Leaving the ramp with bad tires simply means you're going to end up paying for tires even if you complete the trip without having an issue. When you re-ingate, they're going to say you couldn't have possibly outgated it that way because it's illegal, so you must have damaged the tires. So checking tires is vastly important to making sure that you're not going to end up paying for the railroad doing a poor job. So always check your tires carefully. You also want to check the rims of the tires to make sure they're not cracked or bent. Next, you'd want to check the rear underguard, the ICC bumper or DOT bumper, it's also called. If it's bent, you want to make sure you're reporting to the ramp, hey, my DOT bumper's bent, but if it's bent more than 3 inches from its original shape or design, you need to do a flip. You can't take the container as is. It can't be that far bent. It's a safety issue for any drivers behind you. If someone were to drive into you and the DOT bumper was bad, you could be held liable and negligent for the crash, and that could include personal damages as well as prison. You could go to jail because you've negligently allowed a homicide to occur. Next, you want to check the electrical, the lights. Make sure all the lights work. If one's out, make sure the bulb is replaced. Make sure if the electric isn't working that you get it fixed at the mechanics before leaving the ramp. You also want to check to make certain there are reflectors, presence of tape, lamps, and markers, that they're all working. If some aren't working, have them replaced and get them fixed before you outgate. You also want to check your brake lines, air hoses, glad hands. You're checking for audible air leaks and making sure proper pressurization builds from within the truck. If you hear an air leak, again, you want to get it repaired before you go. Air leaks are very dangerous as they affect the brakes and it could lock up and seize on you. You also want to make sure the license plate is on the chassis and that the registration is inside the chassis. You You'll find that inside a holder on the chassis. If you don't see it, we can even print it for you. But you want to make sure before leaving the ramp that the registration matches the plate that's on the chassis. You also want to check for any hazmat placards. Even if it's not a hazmat load, you want to get in the process of always looking to see. Having a placard on a load that doesn't require it can get you big fines. So even if you find one, you want to make sure it's off. If it is a hazmat load, you want to check to make sure you have the proper placards for the load that you're hauling. Finally, you also want to make sure you have an annual inspection sticker and/or an annual inspection sheet. If the sticker says September 2021, it's good until September 2022. It gives you 1 year from the month that the last time the annual inspection was done. If you don't have a sticker or paper, you cannot take it as is. You need to either get an annual inspection done before leaving or flip to a new chassis. Equally, or perhaps more important, depending on your perspective, is the post-trip inspection. The end of every day, you're going to do a post-trip inspection on your truck, and every time you finish using a container, you're going to do a post-trip inspection. You're inspecting the same things you did on your pre-trip inspection, only during a post-trip, you've got a chance to find things wrong and get them fixed before the next day, keeping your truck moving every day versus finding something during your pre-trip. So the more time you spend on a post-trip, the better. You also fill out a DVIR signifying anything you found wrong with both the container you used and the truck. And that DVIR should be filled out every day and turned in every day. If you do notice something wrong, DVIR is not the best way to communicate it with us. Simply tell us, hey, I found something wrong with my truck. What should I do? We have a full service shop that can assist you in making sure your vehicle stays on the road and repaired and is safe and functional. Also, when you drop a container at any customer, you should be doing a thorough post-trip inspection so you're not creating issues for the next driver who needs to pull it. I also recommend when you drop a container at a customer, I would take photos of things like the glad hand, where you hook up the glad hands, the airlines, and the tires, and also the mud flaps. Those are things that often go missing from customers or get broken. Having a photo of where you dropped it and the shape that it was in can be a big help in cutting down your costs. Now that we've got the pre-trip and post-trip out of the way, let's talk a little bit about rules of the road, some safety violations. A big one, and one that we do not tolerate in this company, is the seatbelt. A seatbelt is considered a moving violation for the purposes of FMCSA, and the point value is extremely high. Not to mention, not wearing a seatbelt is dangerous and foolish. You should always have your seatbelt on, whether you're on private property, inside a railroad ramp, in a parking lot. If the vehicle's in motion, your seatbelt should be on. Cell phone is another big one that we do not tolerate. We have a zero exception policy to a cell phone, where we will either ask you to leave the company or to get a camera inside the truck that faces you, where if you are violating the Cell Phone Act, we'll ask that a camera can keep an eye on you to make sure you don't do it again. This also helps the insurance feel comfortable with you after you receive a seatbelt violation, because there's very few things more distracting than talking on a cell phone with it in your hand and or texting with a cell phone. If you are going to talk on a cell phone, you need to be using a Bluetooth or a headset like Bluetooth, where you can keep your eyes on the road and pay attention to what's happening around you. You should also keep your eyes and mind on the road. Keep in mind, if you're going 60 miles an hour and you take your eyes off the road for more than 6 seconds, you've gone the length of a football field. So it's very important to always keep your attention on the road. You want a defensive driving posture where you're not in a hurry. You should never be in a hurry to get anywhere and have plenty of time. You should keep an eye on what other vehicles are doing and try to, in your mind, make out what you think they're trying to do and try to make it easier for them rather than more difficult. So slow down, take your time, pay attention. Some distractions you really should avoid are things like writing while you're driving, writing down a pickup number, reading something, looking for information, trying to send something to dispatch to help them. If you need to send something to us, you should stop the vehicle the next safest spot and then take the time to send over information that dispatch is asking you for. Additionally, if you need information from us, every dispatcher in the company should be able to send you a text to your phone without difficulty, so you will have that number when you need it once you safely arrive at your origin or destination. One of the most common violations we do see are speed violations. The most common place to get one is Route 30 near Warsaw, Indiana. That's somewhere where you should definitely slow down, but you should be going the posted speed, if not a little slower. Take your time. You're not really saving any time by increasing your speed by 10 miles an hour. It's more important that you take your time, relax, and focus on your driving. Don't be in a hurry. The left lane is something I'm sure you've also heard a lot about, especially if you've worked at trucking before. You'll notice there are a lot of signs that say no trucks left lane. This should be a rule of thumb even when there is no sign. You want to avoid the left lane as the purpose of the left lane is for passing vehicles. So vehicles should only be traveling in there when they need to pass another vehicle. If you're a truck and you're in the left lane trying to pass vehicles, odds are you're going too fast, so you need to slow down, stay in your lane. Trucks belong in the right or middle lane whenever possible. You should only be in the left lane if it's necessary, for instance, when there's merging happening, or if it's a case where you're trying to get over to the left lane to help avoid emergency vehicles that are on the side of the road, like Murphy's Law. In the event you were giving a speeding warning, violation, or ticket, doesn't matter which one it is, they're all the same amount of points. How they are handled. We would ask you to come in for safety training on speed management control and defensive driving. That's one of the conditions of being here, is being ready to continue learning even as you've been on the road as long as you may have. Now we're going to talk a little bit about weights and overweights. On a container, to be legal, your steering axle can be 12,000 pounds, your drive axle 34,000, and your trailer axle 34,000, equaling up to a total of 80,000 pounds. If it's over that, you run the risk of getting an overweight ticket. When you first go to the railroad, there is no way to check your weights before you outgate. There's no scale on premises at the railroads. So the best you can do is have an internal gauge that tells you your drive axle. And you want to maximize that drive axle to as close to 34,000 pounds as possible. Before going through a state scale, you should always stop at a certified scale and check your weights. There is one located at the Alsip Truck Center that's for free for our drivers. Now, if you don't have a internal gauge inside the truck, we recommend keeping the rear tandem at least 4 feet from the bumper. You never want to have your wheels slid all the way forward or all the way back, as that automatically attracts police attention. Even if it makes it easier to drive, that's not how you should have your axles set. You should always try to set them to make you less likely to get an overweight ticket. Another thing you want to be conscious of are restricted roads and weight limits. One easy way to help you avoid restricted roads that have weight limits is to have a truck GPS that's updated. You do need to keep it updated as roads do change. But you also want to be aware of signs on the road that say restricted weight limit and things like that. Every spring thaw, since we do go to Michigan a lot, every spring thaw they do restrict the roads only during spring. And it's only specific roads. And every year we send out a list. But you should be conscious of that in Michigan there are different weight rules than in Illinois based on the season. We've also run into things where you've checked the map, you've looked at it carefully, and there is no legal way to get to the customer. So the question becomes, what do? I can't legally get to this customer and I can't legally leave this customer because all the roads to it and from it are restricted. What you want to do is call the local police department or get dispatch involved to call the local police department for you. But you call the police department and ask them, hey, all these roads are restricted going to the warehouse. What path should I take? And they will give you the path you should take there and the path you should take when leaving. This helps you avoid getting a ticket, as if the weight limit's 20,000 pounds and you're hauling 80,000, you are talking about thousands of dollars in tickets. The biggest we've seen so far was $12,000 in a single pullover. So you really want to avoid restricted roads and bridges. Another big question we get asked is, how does an overweight ticket affect my license? Well, frankly, it doesn't. It's considered a business fine. So it's not something they look at as a moving violation. It will never show up on your MVR. All it will show up on would be your PSP report, which is something trucking companies are aware that overweight tickets are very rarely the fault of the driver. So they don't look very hard on it, nor does it affect the scores of a motor carrier or the trucker himself. Other types of tickets can certainly affect your CDL, some in terrible ways. For instance, if you got an improper lane change and were convicted in court, and within 2 years later you got following too closely, that would result in a 60-day suspension of your CDL privileges. All of these can be found in the FMC regulations, but it's very important that you avoid getting moving violations, tickets, and in the event that you do get them, it is in your best interest to go to court. You only get a CDL once, and those kind of things, convictions in court, stay with you for a very long time. So, what should I do if I'm pulled over by the police? Well, for starters, the first thing you should do is make sure the office is aware you're having a police inspection. You want to cooperate fully with the police officer, but you also want to let us know what's happening. And after you get paperwork from the police, whether it's called a warning, a violation, a citation, an inspection, a ticket, don't worry about this, he says. Any sort of paperwork you get from the police, the best thing you can do is take a picture of it, send us an email, so that we can look it over. Us in the safety department, we can look it over and talk to you and say, yes, it's okay, you can keep moving the vehicle. What we want to avoid is anyone violating an out of service. An out of service, if you were caught violating it, means you lose your CDL for 9 months to a year the first time. And there are very few good reasons you would be able to give a police officer as to why you're violating an out of service order. The police officer does not have to tell you. The piece of paper he gives you that says out of service yes or out of service no on it is all it needs to be. And it can be quite confusing. So this is why we want you to send us a copy so we can help you. So please, anytime you're pulled over by the police, send us paperwork, let us know what's happening. In the event it is not an out of service and it's simply a violation, that violation still needs to be addressed, even if it's a warning, before you can start working the following day. You can still work that day, but the way the regulations read, any violation found on the truck that could impair the safety of the vehicle must be repaired before you can take a new dispatch. So while over-the-road guys get a lot longer because their trips are longer, we're home same day. So when you come back that next time, whatever violation you were written up for must be fixed on the truck. Your DVIR form should also have the same violations you got listed on the DVIR form if they were mechanical in nature. And we do need to repair those before you get dispatched again. During an inspection, one of the things the officer is going to ask is to see your log books or paperwork showing what you're doing in the truck that day. If you're a local driver living within a 150 air mile radius, you're going to show them your start or end time paper, the time card exception, which is your daily sheet with your start time and your finish time. And you will only have that one day because you turn in your time card every day. As an ELD driver, or if you're on a paper logbook that day, you would show him your, on an ELD, you'd send him your logs or update them by clicking the HOS button. And then you're going to see an option to either transfer your logs or email them to the officer. After that occurs, he'll look them over and he'll write you any violations that hadn't been done. With paper logs, you should only have one or two, assuming that you're only running long every once in a while. Or if you have a truck older than 1999, then you could be on paper logs all the time, in which case you need to have the previous 7 days on hand. One of the most common questions we get asked is, can I have a passenger in the truck? This is an easy answer. For the most part, the answer is no. The only way you can have a passenger in the truck with you is if you have a note from the trucking company that goes both inside the truck and it also goes inside your DQ file signifying you had a passenger for that day. In order for us to allow a passenger inside the truck, they would have to either be a CDL driver who's interested in becoming an operator at our company. It could never just be a family member or a friend. That provides both a distraction, and the insurance does not cover would there be an accident. So we would never allow it. But regardless, you'd need that note. You can get a big ticket from the police, and you could lose your job. So remember, if you're going to have a passenger in the truck, you need to run it by safety and get a note inside the truck with you, as well as in your DQ file. Next, we're going to talk about some of the accidents at JAS Trucking. For instance, have you ever wondered what the most common accident in the history of JAS Trucking is? Well, the answer may surprise you. The most common accident ever at JAS Trucking always involved the door from a container banging out and hitting something, either because it had too much slack or because it would swing and the chain would break. This happened a lot. So frequently, in fact, that we came up with a solution that makes it easy. Inside your handbook, you'll find a picture of this, but using a bungee cord to secure your door is the safest and best way to make sure that the door doesn't have slack, doesn't swing, the bungee won't break. It is the best solution, and it cut down on accidents dramatically. So always use a bungee cord whenever you're dealing with a container. Do not trust the chains no matter what shape they look like. They create too much slack when you're backing up, and they break very easily. The other types of accidents we definitely want to avoid are hitting someone from behind. Following distance should be the following distance for a truck should always be on the wider side, as it takes longer for you to stop. You should always be in a defensive position, giving yourself plenty of room, and always imagine the car or vehicle in front of you could slam on its brakes at any time. So you want to keep a healthy following distance. This will both avoid you getting violations or tickets, but it'll also keep the public safe. So always keep a wide following distance whenever in traffic. Another very dangerous but has not happened often type of accident is after you've been parked for a long time. This could be getting a repair at the railroad. Make sure to look underneath both your truck and container before pulling out. Make sure there's no one around. Also, when you're at a dock, you want to do the same thing. Make sure there's no one underneath the container or your truck when you're getting ready to pull out. You also want to make sure, if you're at a dock, that there's no one inside the container still working on your load. There's not a forklift inside. There's not a person on a forklift driving back and forth. Make sure they're fully completed, the load is ready, and that you've got the go-ahead to go before you try pulling away from a dock door. There have been some dangerous accidents in both conditions with not paying attention to that. So make sure you're paying attention, that no one is underneath your truck or trailer when you move, and no one is inside your container when you move. Viaducts and low bridges are also a sore spot. You definitely want to make sure you have a truck GPS, as that will help you navigate those things. But you're also looking for clearance signs that say at least 13 foot 6 inches. That's the minimum for you to safely get through with your truck and trailer attached. So you definitely want to watch out for low bridges and viaducts. And again, truck GPS is your best friend in navigating those waters. And be aware, too, that in the wintertime, if there's some buildup, it can be even more treacherous going through a 13 foot 6 bridge. So be sure you're taking the safest route for yourself so that you don't have an accident by going under a bridge that's too tight for your truck and trailer. Another thing to keep in mind is the center of gravity. Whenever you're exiting or entering a ramp, you should go half the posted speed limit of whatever it says on that enter-exit ramp. So if it says 40, you should be doing 20. If it says 30, you should be doing no more than 15. The slow speed make you less likely to flip the load. You should always imagine that every load you're pulling is high and tight, so that it creates a strange center of balance where you really want to take your time doing any kind of turns or curves, and exit-entrance ramps can be very treacherous if you don't treat them very carefully. All the safety training in the world won't prevent every crash that's going to occur. Sometimes it can be the other person's fault, and sometimes it could be your fault. The best thing to do is report honestly any accident that you have. Remember, there are cameras everywhere. There is no getting away with an accident. So your best bet is, as soon as an accident happens, if anyone is injured, start with 911. Get help on the way. Regardless of who's at fault. Don't even think about that. Start with 911. Then, evaluate what just occurred. Take photos of everything, including your own vehicle and the other vehicle, parts that are damaged and parts that are perfectly fine. You don't want to be responsible for something you didn't cause, so you want to make sure you have pictures of things that are not damaged, as well as the parts of the vehicle that are damaged. You can never take too many pictures. Call dispatch immediately. Let them know what's happening. They will transfer you to the responsible party if needed. Then you need to ask yourself, do I need a post-accident drug and alcohol test? Well, This is, if someone has died, automatically you need a post-accident drug and alcohol test. It doesn't matter who's at fault. There are two other instances where you would need one. If one of the vehicle needs to be towed and you got a ticket, as well as if someone is taken away in an ambulance and you get a ticket. Just an ambulance, no drug and alcohol test. It needs to be an ambulance and a ticket, or a tow and a ticket. However, if there's a fatality, if anyone dies in the crash, no matter who's at fault, you do need a post-accident drug and alcohol test. Another thing to bear in mind is sometimes someone will say you had an accident with them when you believe you did not. It is just as important to report things like that. In fact, you should be in the habit of reporting anything unusual in your day that occurs. That's your best bet. All we're going to do is try and help you. So anything strange, anything out of the ordinary, call your dispatcher to get some assistance. And if you're in a crash and you're not at fault, I would always recommend you get a police report. Always report any crash that occurs to the police and get a report. It doesn't mean it's going to go on your MVR. That's a fallacy. What goes on your MVR are crashes over a certain amount of financial damage and or crashes that involve a DOT reportable, such as an injury, a tow, or a fatality. Those would always go on your MVR. So please, always remember, report any accident as it occurs, and let the safety team, we're just here to help you.